Max Verstappen's weekend couldn't end much worse, as following his 10-second time penalty for causing a collision with Lando Norris at the Austrian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen has had 2 penalty points applied to his superlicense. Next to this, he has become enemy number 1 on the grid and in F1's fanbase once again, and realization has set in that he and the RB20 are more than beatable this year. Despite Verstappen appearing to have a race-winning 7-second lead midway through the 71-lap Grand Prix, tyre troubles, a late pit stop and a lockup caused Norris, who had been running second all race, to close down on the rear of the RB20. What ensued was a dramatic 10-lap brawl between the two close friends. While Norris attempted to pass many times into turn 3, complaining that Verstappen was making double movements to stop him, the situation reached a boiling point on lap 64, when the McLaren driver attempted to pass again, this time around the outside into the turn 3 braking zone. Verstappen raced to the left to block Norris, but the Briton kept to his line, and the two cars collided, both resulting in rear punctures. Norris returned to the pits to retire his MCL 38, while Verstappen stopped for fresh rubber and finished 5th, a position he maintained despite a 10-second time penalty for triggering the incident. The stewards later increased his sentence by 2 penalty points on his superlicense, increasing his total to 4 in the previous year. They also gave clarity on the decision and ended speculation of whose fault it really was. The stewards' ruling, which imposed a time penalty and penalty points on Verstappen, read, Car 1, Verstappen was approaching turn 3 with car 4, Norris alongside on his left. Before turning in, the driver of car 1 moved to the left, causing a collision with car 4. The stewards determined that the driver of car 1 was predominantly at fault and therefore imposed the above-mentioned penalty in line with precedents. Prior to their duel in Austria, Verstappen and Norris had fought hard for victory on several occasions, with the two dominating the top of the grid in 5 of the previous 6 races. When asked if it was inevitable that they would come together, Verstappen replied, "You shouldn't think like that, and that's also never how I thought about stuff. But of course sometimes these things happen which you never want to happen. The dive bombing, it's just sending it up late and hoping that the other guy gets out of it and you make the corner, which wasn't the case. Of course, you can say moving under braking for me, which wasn't the case because I didn't move when I braked. Just sending it up the inside from far, it looks good, I like it as well. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. That didn't work out for Norris. The contact we had was super unfortunate. Verstappen himself also talked about the accident for the first time and why Lando Norris was even able to come this close during the race. A race where Verstappen was looking semi-dominant until his team messed up, at least according to Verstappen. He claims Red Bull got itself in a fight with Lando Norris by doing everything wrong in the awful Austrian Grand Prix. Verstappen blamed Red Bull for doing everything wrong throughout the race, including its race strategy and pit stop execution, which he said allowed Norris the opportunity to put him under pressure in the first place. The first stint was quite good, but at the end I caught quite a bit of traffic, which we should have just boxed for me because I just gave up free lap time, he said. We basically did a lot of things wrong today. It started with the strategy, then the pit stops were a disaster. The first one was already bad, the second one was even more of a disaster. That's 6 seconds over those 2 pit stops that you give away, and then of course it's a race again. And that's why I think also we put ourselves in that position. We did everything wrong that we could have done wrong. Today has just been awful. Verstappen was also perplexed as to why, after such a good first half of the race, his car's driving style degraded to the point that he deemed it undrivable in the last stint on scrubbed medium tyres. I don't know why, but the car just started to become worse and worse throughout the race. So that is also something that we have to look into maybe. That something broke on the car, said the driver. I honestly have no explanation why suddenly the car just transformed from an okay balance to just undrivable behaviour afterwards, which normally indicates that something was also wrong. But even with that, we should have won today if we didn't make so many errors as well with the pit stops. There must have been something weird going on with the car because it suddenly just became an undrivable car. It's so hard, Verstappen added when asked for an explanation regarding the problems he was facing. It's probably also really about attention to detail. If you just find a little bit of a better setup, it can help you. Christian Horner, however, sought perspective after Max Verstappen claimed Red Bull did a lot of stuff wrong at the Austrian Grand Prix. From our side, we have to look at the whole race because I think we did a lot of stuff wrong, Verstappen said after the race. We had 2 very poor pit stops which basically put us back, and that's why we were fighting to the end because we had a very healthy lead. We could definitely have had a different race if we'd executed the race a lot better. So there's definitely a few things to look at and do better for next week. Speaking afterwards, Red Bull team principal Horner attempted to put the three-time world champion's views in context, acknowledging that, while hindsight is a wonderful thing, the fact that he came away from the weekend with a larger lead in the Drivers' Championship means the weekend was not a total loss. "You've spoken to him when he's just had a tough race," Horner said when asked about Verstappen's comments. "I think with the strategy for us, we were going into the race looking at medium hard, and if you look, what I think he's talking about is the point at which we stopped, at the second stop because we extended to cover Norris. Whilst we were quicker than Norris, it makes sense to do that because you get unlucky with a safety car, you lose track position. So therefore, whilst we had the pace on Lando and were able to be maintaining and pulling a gap, it's sometimes tactically it makes sense to do that. Probably we would have been better off with a new medium versus the new hard, but you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Look, the pace of the car has been very strong this weekend. We've had 2 poles, he's led all but 9 laps of the race. The sprint race yesterday, he's extended his lead in the championship. We've extended our lead I think in the Constructors' Championship. So despite not getting the win, it's not been totally disastrous. What do you think? Is Horner right here? Should they just focus on the positive of extending the championship lead? Red Bull's advisor Helmut Marko also commented on the accident and feels both Max Verstappen and Lando Norris share part of the fault for their Austrian Grand Prix collision, but so does Red Bull. "We lost the victory due to several factors," Marko said. "The fact that our pit stop went wrong, which put Lando in DRS range. We expected that the hard tyres would be the better choice, but that turned out to not be the case. The temperatures were lower than expected. That meant Lando had new tyres in his last stint and we were unused. That was also a factor. Max also locked up after his pit stop in turn 4. All that together made it difficult for us." Speaking particularly about Verstappen's collision with Norris, Marko blamed both drivers but also said that Red Bull should have urged Verstappen to let the Briton past him given Norris's 5-second penalty for violating track restrictions. "I think they both drove unnecessarily fiercely," Marko continued. "In doing so, maybe we should have intervened as well, because we knew there was an investigation going on about Lando and track limits. We just didn't know yet if he would be punished. With hindsight, you can then say, okay, let him go. But let's look on the bright side. We increased our lead in both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. It was a great fight until it somehow degenerated. Who breaks where? Who grabs more track limits instead of focusing on a fair finish? It's clear that Red Bull's stance is a Verstappen defending one, but if the stewards rule for a penalty, it's quite clear, right? What are your thoughts on the accident? Just a racing incident, or an inevitable end to a boiling rivalry over the last races? And what will happen this weekend? Will they collide again, or will they try to keep it clean from now on? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.